Hello, YouTube. Most of my subs know about me from my free-to-play challenge accounts that I've been using for my videos, but a few subs who have been around for a very long time will actually remember my 1.0 Dolphin account that I used to use for Zero Cycle videos on a channel that doesn't even exist anymore. I haven't logged into this account in a long time, but I opened it up recently to record some footage for an upcoming video. And looking at all the characters made me wonder, if I was a free-to-play player starting in 1.0, what would my account have looked like today? HSR was my first gacha, so I had to learn a lot about the economy of the game as I went along. But what if I knew back then everything I know now about account management, but not anything about the meta? So, for example, I would have known things like energy is very important, action advance is very important, but I wouldn't have known things like Kafka is not going to get any support basically for 2 years. What would that account turn out like? And so in the base game today, we know we have about 500 pulls. That's from the permanent content. And on top of that, we get about 100 pulls per patch, which over 2 years comes out to about 24 characters worth of cost. What kind of account would those 24 guaranteed pulls result in if I could do it all over again from the beginning? Let's get started with the first premium 5-star in the game, Zele. On release, there were some detractors that said that Zele's DPS was going to get power crept, and that's true, it did happen eventually. But it turns out that having extra turns built into your base kit that don't cause your DPS buffs to fall off is pretty good in a turn-based game. So if you kept pulling into her optimal team, which today is probably Robin and Sunday, Zele is still very relevant even if she doesn't place highly on the tier list. She does well on True Sting, which is a boss that has 2 separate versions of, and she is still doing well in Pure Fiction. Knowing what I know today, I still would have pulled Zele at the beginning of the game, and in fact, I would have pulled her at S1. Her light cone is pretty good for her. It helps enable her resurgences by front-loading her damage, and it saves the Herda store light cone for Dan Heng and Yan Qing, who were still relevant DPS in 1.0. Next up is Jing Yuan. I love the general, but unfortunately, even on release, he was already nicknamed as Mid Yuan. His kit had a lot of problems, especially with the Lightning Lord, and on most fights, he didn't do that much better than E6 Serval, which is not a great place to be. In fact, his performance did not improve until almost a year and a half later, with the release of Sunday, at which point he does become a good character. But at the time, I think he was definitely an easy skip. Silver Wolf was a character that was hyped up by the community because the idea of mono quantum was peddled by content creators as a way to immunize yourself against various metas and needing to pull DPS of different elements. And I think that even at the time of her release, it was obvious that Silver Wolf would not be able to actually accomplish that goal. Her kit didn't actually make a lot of sense because as a single target debuffer, she didn't synergize very well with Zele or Qinshui, both of whom are multi-target fights. And it also felt like she needed E1 just to function at a basic level in order to be able to move her defense shred enough, to the point where most people probably just preferred playing Pella overall. I think there is a world where she's a S-tier character, a world where the only kinds of bosses that we have are Aventurines, or Hulays, where it's all single target, but that's not a world where we live in. Easy skip. Luocha was the first premium healer in the game, and although he is generally skill point positive, which was an interesting feature at the time, a lot of what he was providing to the team could have been replicated by something like Natasha with multiplication. The main thing he provided actually ended up being his Dispel, which in the long term ended up not being relevant. But sustain was not a major problem in 1.0, and in fact fights ended so quickly that you didn't even need a sustain, and to a large degree you still don't. So as a sustain that didn't actually provide much towards the DPS of the team until his E1, I think he was an easy skip. Blade is our first DPS question mark because he is a decent upgrade over Dan Heng, but at the same time he also had a lot of problems on release. His first major problem, of course, was that he didn't have any supports for his archetype. Bronya was only a tangential support, and her attack percent buffing did not help him at all. And so there was a question mark of what is Blade's potential. And his potential was bizarre because a lot of his damage was loaded into his follow-up, but his follow-up felt like an erudition talent that was stuck onto a character that you really wanted to be single target. I think that he would have been a lot more obvious as a character if more of that follow-up was towards his main target. And I think that's a lot of the problems that he has. And the fact that his archetype didn't get buffed for, well, another 2 years doesn't help. Finally, the final nail in the coffin is that he doesn't have any good light cones in the base game. And so pulling for his light cone with all the question marks that are on top of his kit, I think makes him an easy skip. Next is Kafka, and of course we are pulling Kafka. Kafka is the first character that you meet in the game. She is cool, her kit is interesting, different, and fun. She has some future proofing to her because she is mostly a support for other dot DPS, so she detonates dots. And people forget about this, but at the time of release, she actually did well. She was very strong and very flexible. You could run her with harmony supports, you could run her with dot supports, you could run her in a crit relic set, you could do whatever you want, and she did well. Of course, at the time, there was no way of predicting that MiHoYo would completely forget that the character exists for the next 2 years, for the most part. But on release, she was good, and definitely a character I would be pulling. However, unlike Zele, who was a great S1, in fact, Kafka would be an E0 pull. And the reason for this is that on the Zele Light Cone banner, we would have picked up several copies of Goodnight Sleep Well, which was a decent replacement for Kafka's own signature Light Cone. Next up is Imbibitor Lune. Imbibitor Lune was definitely a gamble in some ways because he required a lot of energy and a lot of skill points. But he had a lot of things going for him as well. First of all, he did a lot of damage, and this was one of the first characters where the question of power creep started coming up. He obviously had a lot of potential where either skill point or energy based supports would buff him significantly. He had an obvious upgrade path because at this point it was clear that Zele was strong because of her resurgences, and so if you wanted to keep using Imbibitor Lune in the future, you could pull for his E2 at a rerun, and that would future-proof him to a degree. And finally, he was the only imaginary DPS in the game, because at this point it was becoming obvious that Welt was not going to be able to fill that role. And so, for those reasons, I think Inhibitor Lune was, and still is, a good pull, and we would be pulling him not only at E0, but actually at S1. And the reason for that, even though he works well with the Herda light cone, is that his light cone banner contained Dance Dance Dance, which at this point for Zero Cyclers it was becoming obvious that is an obviously overpowered light cone. Next up is Fushuan. On release, Fushuan got a lot better reception than Luocha did, but in some ways she was proof that mono quantum was not going to be a thing. And I personally was actually critical of her for the fact that she needs to use skill points to keep up her defensive shield for the team. I thought that her being somewhat skill point inefficient would make her less used than other characters and other sustains, and that she didn't do enough to justify that. And so I skipped her on her first run, and I think I would skip her again knowing what I know now. The fact that she is the sustain that was added to the 50-50 loss pool says a lot about her long-term utilization. Next up is Jing Liu, and Jing Liu was the other DPS that brought up questions of power creep in 1.0, and she was very good. She had several problems in her kit that were obvious on release. The two major problems was that her scaling was actually not great, and her inability to necessarily maintain her enhanced form permanently. Having her power down was a significant detriment. At the time, those were largely overlooked because she was, practically speaking, the only good Frost DPS in the game. Yan Cheng was starting to show his age and how much maintenance he needed, and Herda could not realistically replace a single target DPS. I think at the time, Jing Liu would have been a character that I would still pull, just for the niche that she filled. And she's not a bad character. To this day, I think that even though she's fallen off and she doesn't really have a great upgrade path, she can still do well in the Robin Sunday shell. But overall, I don't think she would have been worth investing more than just E0. Topaz had a very poor reception because she was a character that did not have a proper team yet. And unlike Kafka, who performed very well on release, Topaz did not. I was doing 0 cycles at the time, and I was getting similar 0 cycles with Hook that I was seeing with other Topaz players. So, combined with the fact that the team that she was going to fill in was not obvious, and the fact that some people got already burned on Silverwolf by pulling for a potential team that did not materialize, Topaz was, and I think still would be, an easy skip. Now, Huohuo was actually the first support that got my attention. In some ways, she's my favorite support as a character, but regardless of that bias, her ability to pump energy is very powerful. Zero Cyclers at the time already knew that Quid Pro Quo is a powerful tool set of the Abundance characters, and one of the things that set them apart from Preservation. And the ability to pump your team's energy is extremely relevant at all times. She was important for pumping the energy of characters like Jing Liu, who had potentially a gap if they could not keep chaining their ultimates in time. And she could also provide energy to characters like Imbibitor Lune, because the extra ults that she would generate for him would offset her own skill point neutrality. And so, considering we pulled both of those characters, Huo Huo was a pull for me back then, and still is a pull today. Argenti, when he released, did not make a lot of sense as a character because Pure Fiction did not exist yet. And knowing what we know about the game mechanics, we probably still don't pull him. He's a skip. Ruan Mei was the first Harmony premium character released in the game, and easily an E0 pull. She was a big upgrade over characters like Pella. She was a big addition to Jinglu teams. And she worked well without her signature light cone because you could stick Dance 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 on her and it would be perfectly adequate. Definitely a pull back then and today. Now, Feixiao was a character that was provided for free, and at this point, with the release of Feixiao, it became obvious the team that Topaz was supposed to service. So the question was, do you keep investing in Feixiao because you want to play that team? The problem with Topaz supporting Feixiao was that it was generally agreed that you wanted something like E1S1 on Topaz to support Feixiao. And even though you can probably get away with not doing that, that's still a lot of investment for a character that you're getting for free. And so you don't really need to pull any additional light cones or Eidolons for him. Just use him for free. Next up is the first DPS of 2.0, Black Swan. Unreleased, Black Swan played pretty well. She did good damage. She supported Kafka, whom we have pulled on the simulated accounts. She was a win DPS, which was a gap for a lot of accounts, including this simulated account, since we would have skipped Blade 6 months earlier. She was a good character. And not only would we pull her at E0, but actually at S1. The reason being, of course, because her signature light cone banner was the most disgusting light cone that we have seen so far, because it reran with both Resolution Shines and Dance Dance Dance. Next is Sparkle. Sparkle doesn't get a lot of attention anymore, but she is still a very good character that put well with Dan Hang Imbibitor Lune that we pulled on this account, as well as our next pull. But for now, she would have been an E0 pull. She works well with Dance Dance Dance. No need for her signature light cone. Which brings us to Acheron, which is the second massive power spike in the game after Jinglu, and the first one really where the question of power creep becomes impossible to ignore. The power level on Acheron was completely different from anything we have seen before. She worked well with free to play 4-star characters. The only thing about her was that she kind of needed her signature light cone, because to this day there is no good signature light cone in the game for her. But definitely, even if you ignore that she's a Raiden SB, that she's voiced by Miyuki Sawashiro in Japanese, she's an S1 pull. Next up is Aventurine. At this point, we would have had a couple of weeks to play with Acheron, and we would have accepted the fact that Acheron is a completely different video game from the rest of the DPS that have released so far, and that this would be a character that we would want to continue investing in. So far, we only pulled Huo Huo as a premium 5-star, and so Aventurine as a character that supported Acheron, for me, would have been an easy pick at E0. Next up is Robin. Action Advance continues to be one of the most powerful tools in this game, but even without that, Robin provided a lot of DPS for her team. She worked well with her free-to-play event-like cone. We already would have had two pieces of her team, being Feixiao and Aventurine. You could pull her arguably at E1 level at this point, but since we're still skeptical and we don't want to go into a team too hard before we're completely confident in it, E0. Next, Boot Hill. On release, there was a lot of questions about him. It wasn't clear if he would function well as a single target DPS, but after release and after some testing, it became obvious that he did something important for most accounts. Specifically, he answered the question of a couple of humanoid bosses, specifically Aventurine, but also Cocolia and Kafka, who is a frequent final boss. Just does very good damage to him. And we already pulled Ruan Mei for his team in 1.6, so for me, in retrospect, he would have been a pull at E0. And so we have pulled characters in a long string so far, which we were able to do because we had probably skipped too many characters in 1.0. But now we have to break the chain, which brings us to Firefly. And as a Firefly main, it pains me to say that Firefly is a skip. On release, Firefly had a lot of problems as a character. Her downtime when her enhanced mode turns off, the fact that she needs to use a lot of skill points to get back into enhanced mode at all, the fact that she needs to spend time breaking enemies before she does any damage, the fact that she doesn't do terrific single target damage, but she also doesn't do terrific AoE unless she's E2. Personally, I think that in retrospect, Firefly is a skip. If you love the character, there is upgrade potential because at E2 she becomes one of the more powerful characters in the game, as having Resurgence is very strong. But on release, unless you really love the character, I think she's a skip. On the other hand, Jade is the first Erudition character not called Acheron, released in 2.0, and the first Erudition character to be released since the release of Pure Fiction. I think that at that point, it was becoming more clear that you probably wanted some help with Pure Fiction. At the time, it was one of the harder modes to get full points in, even if you did have the Himiko Herda engine. And as a quantum DPS, she was filling an interesting niche that wasn't apparent then, but today is certainly very relevant because we see AoE quantum damage everywhere. But even without knowing that, I think that Jade would have been an easier pull for me. Yoon Lee is a character that I personally love as an individual, but I don't like her archetype. I don't like the counter archetype. I don't think it worked very well in this game. We already would have pulled Boot Hill for this account, so we didn't exactly need physical damage coverage. If we wanted something even more AoE than her, we could have used Clara, although Clara is the reason I don't like the counter archetype. Unfortunately, because of all those reasons, added with the fact that she kind of wants her signature icon, for me she's a skip. And on the other hand, Zhao Chu is an easier pull. He makes the Acheron team so much better in every way. Which brings us to Feixiao. As a Feixiao main, you obviously know that I'm biased towards this character, but even without her, at this point, we would have noticed that Black Swan and Kafka were not getting a lot of attention. but also that we weren't really using our Robin to full effect. Feixiao does a lot of single target damage. She is a good counter for Hule, which we don't have a great counter for on this account. She is free to play friendly because we already have the Robin that she needs, and the Aventurine. We only need to run her with either Mose or with March, which are perfectly functional replacements for Topaz. She works okay with the free-to-play Herda Lycone, so an easy E0 pull. But this is not the only pull we make on this banner. In addition, at this point we would have noticed that Robin's E1 is in fact very strong and very flexible, and so actually I would have taken Robin to E1 at this point. On the second half of the banner is Linksha, and Linksha was, for a lot of content creators, a skip or a question mark. I thought that she was very powerful and mechanically very good because she has coverage for ultimate triggers, she has follow-ups, she has break. She's like an all-star MVP in Pure Fiction, and to a certain degree Apocalyptic Shadow, which is a mode that depends on total toughness damage. But even with all those things considered, because we skipped Firefly, I think we would also skip Linksha, because Linksha is a character that at this point in the game really only shines with Firefly, and even then she's still replaceable with Gallagher, so skip on her first run. On the other hand, Rappa is a character that I think is very cool. I like her design, I like her character, and she just does good damage. She, unlike Firefly, doesn't have significant issues with her kit. Generally, she's almost always in her enhanced mode. She has a lot of enemies that she is favorable against, not only the ones released in her patch, being the musical robots, but also the monkeys, but even the ones from further in the past, like True Sting. And so for all those reasons, Rappa is an easier pull. Sunday follows the same rule that we've established with Sparkle and Robin. If it's action advance, it's a good character, and Sunday is especially so because of the fact that not only does he do the most powerful thing in the game of action advancing and providing extra turns, but he does the second most powerful thing in the game, being providing energy. Easy pull. Brings us to the next character on the list, Fugue. At this point, we have invested into 2 break effect characters in Boothill and Rappa, and Fugue is a fairly significant upgrade over Harmony MC. Not necessarily a mandatory one, but since we're committed to the archetype, easier pull. Next up, we have the first TPS of 3.0, Herda. Herda is the first erudition characters since Jade. She works well with Jade, whom we pulled. And on top of that, she provides an entire archetype that we didn't have before. She has her own built-in action advance on her ultimate. She has her own built-in energy regen through her synergy with her erudition supports. In retrospect, she's just a very powerful character. Doesn't need her light cone necessarily. There's plenty of free-to-play friendly erudition light cones to use. she's an easy E0 pull, contrary to Aglaia, who unfortunately does require some support. The reasons being that she does need her E1 largely to plug in the gap. We have seen this problem with other characters like Firefly, where you really want to be in her enhanced state the entire time. And unlike Firefly, Aglaia can actually accomplish that through her E1. However, at this point, we already have Acheron. We're perfectly satisfied with Acheron. Even though we have Huohuo and Sunday and Robin, which are in Aglaia's best in slot team, there's really no need for us for this account on Aglaia. And for that reason, she's a skip. Next up is Midday, Enhanced Blade. And I think Midday is just a skip. At this point, we still don't really know what his archetype is going to look like. He kind of falls into the same boat as Blade. Of course, he does better than Blade, but like Blade, he doesn't have a good free-to-play light cone. His own light cone is a big upgrade for him. Tribby is coming up, and for that reason, we are skipping Midday. And then finally, Tribby. We have only one pull left in our 24 pulls since the game has started. And Tribby is looking like a second Robin. Very powerful character, very flexible, enhancing the HP percent archetype if we ever choose to pull into that archetype. E0 pull. Now, this brings us to the most recent release, which is Castoris, and unfortunately we don't have any Stellar Jade left, which brings us to the end of this list. Alright, let's do some closing thoughts. The first thing I noticed is that even with all the knowledge that we have about the game now, it's probably impossible to make no mistakes on an account. You know, this Kafka and Swan are probably considered mistakes today, even though it's technically not their fault. This, you know, Zhao Chu ended up being a Acheron support rather than a Kafka one. Huohuo is skill point neutral to, and these two actually want the skill point positive sustain. So it's not their fault they got no support from MiHoYo in a long time. A more clear case is something like Jinglu, which sort of made sense at the time in the meta, but in the long term, her scaling problems become apparent. But it's okay. It's not going to break the entire account if you make some mistakes, as long as your overall pulling strategy is coherent. However, the other thing I would say I have noticed is that if a character gets bad, they're probably never getting fixed. So Silver Wolf is an example, a poor debuff uptime, skill point hungry. She never really got fixed. One day in 5.0, there will probably be some meta where she's very good, but to this day, like, it's just too many problems. Same thing goes for something like Firefly. Unless you were planning to pull an E2, nothing solved her problems in her team that we have now. And even if you did pull on her E2, you know, she still has this weird problem where her enhanced mode turns off. And so you have to, like, kind of just manually get it back. You like want some kind of energy character like a Sunday on her team, but there's no room for it. So here's the thing. If a character is bad on release, don't pull them hoping that they will get good. There are characters that have gotten good. Topaz with the release of Robin and Jing Yuan with the release of Sunday had significant buffs. But here's the thing. they will probably be rerun alongside the character that makes them good. So the same way Sunday and Jing Yuan ran together. So if a character's bad, just skip and then wait for the rerun. The third thing I noticed is how tight this budget is. For me as a vertical player, I just pull whatever's good for my two teams, and I don't really have to think. But in this simulated account, we actually ended up with a lot of E0s. And so, when we were pulling these, some of the logic that we used was, well, Imbibitor Lune has a lot of scaling potential. He can eventually go to E2, get extra turns. He'll have some long-term survivability as a DPS. But in retrospect, it's really hard to find two cost points to actually get him to E2. We would have to make sacrifices, and probably nothing makes sense. So, if you are making a decision to take a character to E2 or even get them S1 at some point in the future, it has to be a very conscious decision. So if you want to take this Acheron to E2 because, it's a super powerful character, you have to make a conscious decision of where you're getting those Eidolons from. And, those decisions can be painful. They're not very obvious. Who here should go if you want to take this Acheron to E2? It might be someone like Robin. It's like, if we're going with Robin, maybe you're dropping an entire archetype, because without Robin, Feixiao doesn't make sense anymore either. And so if you're dropping Feixiao, maybe now you have a light cone slot for Zhao Chu, who is important for this Acheron. So actually what's interesting is that if you're going vertical, if you're ever plan on going vertical, because you're looking at the Eidolons and you're thinking, man, these are good Eidolons, it has to be a very conscious decision. And you have to be prepared to probably invest, drop an entire other archetype for it. You can, however, invest vertically in one team. So, you would drop Robin, you would drop Feixiao, and then, you would get a light cone for Zhao Chu to buff that damage a bit. And then you could invest horizontally in the other team. We will still have a break team, we'd have a dot team, we'd have some, AoE follow-up support. So we would still have both a strong team and some flexibility. I think that summarizes my thoughts overall. I kind of actually learned a lot from doing this. It made me see horizontal investment in a way that I haven't before. Let me know what you think. What have been the characters that have disappointed you the most, but also the ones that you did not expect to be great, but ended up being, overperformers on your account. Let me know in the comments. In the meantime, I have started a new account for 3.2. This will be used for finishing the game, but also making videos that will effectively be new player guides. So look out for that in the video next week. I'll see you then.